public policy think tank that has a vision of evidence-informed policy in the Caribbean. The OneCity program is being executed by a consortium of civil society organizations. In addition to CAPRI, there is SlashRoots, Fight for Peace, and the MonaGeoInformatics Institute. And we recognize the importance of integrating youth into mainstream urban life and governance. And that's what this program of work is about. Amongst the activities, amongst the many activities in the program of work, is a production of 5 studies, of which the one that is being launched this evening is the inaugural one. Coming up next on your program will be remarks by representing our partners by Matthew McNaughton of SlashRoots Foundation. That will be followed by the presentation of the first study, and then we will have a panel discussion. Our panelists are Professor Carol Archer, who is Professor of Urban Planning and Public Policy at UTEC, Simone Lloyd, Senior GIS Manager and Trainer at the National Spatial Data Management Branch at the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and Ali Mahabir, who is a research fellow working on this project for CAPRI. Thank you for coming. I now hand over to Matthew for his remarks.
Good evening, colleagues. Welcome to the launch of the OneCity report, Who Gets What? Mapping Rights, Access, and the Future of Jamaica's Cities. My name is Matthew McNaughton, and I'm one of the co-founders of the SlashRoots Foundation. SlashRoots is a proud member of the OneCity consortium of partners alongside CAPRI, Fight for Peace, and MonaGeoInformatics. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Tonight, we are launching the first report of the OneCity initiative. For those unfamiliar with OneCity, it is a multi-year action research effort aiming to create more effective pathways for young people and communities to shape the direction of their environment and the institutions that serve them. Today's report was motivated by one question: how effective are communities at supporting the fulsome integration of their residents into the broader Jamaican society? Our response, the OneCity Index, is at the center of the study being launched this evening. And we believe that this will be an important contribution to Jamaica's urban planning discourse at a time when we're all experiencing the rapid expansion in capital investments in our built environment, and more of us are asking, what kind of Jamaica do we want to live in, and what do we want our communities to look like? I want to say thank you to Diana, Alex, and Aleem for leading this work, and the many partners that contributed data, helped us think through aspects of the methodology, and shared feedback on the overall project. We are especially grateful to Foundation BOTNAR, who provided the financial support to make the OneCity initiative possible. We're looking forward to discussing the new questions that the study raises in your minds, as well as how it helps us all examine old problems with new insights. With that, I hand over to the CAPRI team to get us going, and I thank you all for being here with us tonight.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming. I'm Alexander Coswell. I'm a researcher on this project. I'm also the project lead for OneCity. Last year, my colleague Damon and I attended a presentation by Google in Jamaica, in which they were showcasing their, how is this going? They're showcasing their new Gemini product. Sorry. And in it, in the presentation, they asked Gemini to generate an image of Kingston in 2050. And Gemini produced an image of a futuristic city version of Kingston with futuristic high-rises that were surrounded by slums. Now, I think this is because Gemini has noticed what a lot of us have noticed, which is that across Kingston's urban environment, Jamaica's urban environment, communities are growing, but not growing at equal rates. This study represents, thank you. This study represents an effort to better understand the disparities, the spatial inequality that affects Jamaica's urban communities, so that we can develop methodologies and coordinate agency efforts to alleviate these spatial inequalities. Spatial inequality in terms of infrastructure, and in terms of socioeconomic outcomes. Now, despite decades of investment, reform, urban exclusion persists. Access to basic services remains uneven across the urban space, and policy responses are fragmented and reactive. Why does this matter? Because urban exclusion leaves people more vulnerable to crime, it entrenches poverty, and undermines national development. Fragmented data systems make it difficult to plan effectively. Communities that are most vulnerable are often invisible, and official statistics vulnerable and invisible from official statistics and excluded from planning. What's missing? First, a baseline understanding of where exclusion is happening and why. Also, a tool that we can use to move beyond anecdotes and assumptions and set clear benchmarks to improve urban planning and service delivery. Also, a framework to center the right to the city, the idea that everyone has a right to shape, access, and benefit from urban life. This study helps answer that gap by using data, spatial analysis, and a rights-based lens to map urban equality and supports evidence-based interventions. We ground our analysis in the right to the city framework, which calls for inclusive, democratic, and equitable urban development. It recognizes that all residents deserve secure property rights, infrastructure, and services, and a voice in shaping their communities. Spatial inequality is about how geography determines access or exclusion. Residents of many communities exist in a state of semi-marginalization or isolation from mainstream urban life. Infrastructure upgrades in some communities and maintenance are ad hoc rather than programmatic, if they take place at all. And as a result, some communities remain underdeveloped, which perpetuates the stigma of marginalization. To measure and address this, we developed a set of 14 different indicators in our Urban Integration Index, combining geospatial, infrastructural, socioeconomic, and administrative data to evaluate where the city is working and where it is failing its residents. We map how across 173 districts, urban districts across Jamaica, how they measure on each different indicator. And we created an index to provide an overall comparison. And in this study, we not only present the findings for each indicator, but you also analyze some key trends relating to the community outcomes. We sourced and validated data from government ministries and agencies, community mapping projects, civil society partners, and international sources such as OpenStreetMap and Human Data Exchange. Point of note, the data we utilize is valid up until 2023. So it does not take into account any recent developments that are going on. Our maps reveal profound disparities. In Kingston, communities like Denham Town, Seaview Gardens score far lower overall than places like Mona Heights and Hope Pastures. In Montego Bay, areas like Flankers, Canterbury show deep exclusion, especially in terms of access to piped water, regularized piped water, sanitation services, and financial inclusion. This should come as no shock that the overall finding is that high-income, formally planned communities, Norbrook, Ironshore, in Montego Bay, score highly across most indicators. Quality of education, infrastructure, water, sanitation, financial services, what have you. Informality. Communities, districts with high levels of informality score low overall. It is the most impactful indicator that we found in this study. And so communities like Denham Town in Kingston, Flankers in Montego Bay, communities with high levels of informality, even when they're close to commercial business districts, score lowly in terms of infrastructure access and social services. The lack of formal tenure remains a primary barrier to integration. It limits infrastructure investment, it perpetuates vulnerability, and it creates criminal enclaves. Higher informal areas have low rates of access to basic services such as formal electricity connections and solid waste services. They feature less investment overall by the state and private sector, reflected in lower levels of employment and productive activity. As I mentioned, Denham Town, highly informal. Around 71% of Denham Town, we estimate, is informal by our own mapping, which contributes to its regular instability and persistent underinvestment. The evidence suggests that unplanned communities are less safe, as evidenced by the prevalence of major crime incidents in our data set. The community mapping we undertook for this study represents the first efforts that we know of to document the boundaries of Jamaica's urban informal settlements. And as you can see, the incidence of armed violence, which is represented by the red dot, is highly concentrated around those urban informal enclaves. This finding supports the findings of our previous work, Groundwork for Peace, which found that around 50% of all incidents of armed violence across Jamaica occur in and around informal settlements. But it's not just safety in terms of crime, it's also the same communities that are vulnerable to crime are also vulnerable environmentally. Urban communities with low safety scores, such as Trenchtown, Flankers, Canterbury, are also areas with high environmental vulnerability, which includes flood risk, poor air quality, and higher temperatures. Yes, these communities are hotter on average. These communities are often settlements located in geographical marginal areas, such as gully banks, reclaimed land, or low-lying floodplains, outside the formal planning system. Spatial inequality also impacts digital access and financial inclusion, meaning that these communities with high levels of informality are not just excluded from physical infrastructure, but are also left out of digital and financial services. Informal areas often lack broadband infrastructure, necessitate interventions such as installations of community Wi-Fi by the state. The lack of ID, formal addresses, and documentation also presents a barrier to residents from access to the financial system. They're underbanked. For this study, we also use a novel methodology called space syntax to assess the interconnectivity of urban communities through their road networks. We found that, unsurprisingly, the regular grid layouts of communities, streets in the communities, tend to coincide with better access to public transportation. More surprisingly, grid layouts also predict higher levels of crime. Now, why is this the case? Well, this is understandable when you consider that major commercial districts are such as downtown Kingston, downtown Montego Bay, Crossroads, are mainly the areas where you have grid structures in Jamaica, grid street structures in Jamaica. They also present great opportunities for crime. However, this also represents opportunity for government initiatives such as CCT systems, as Jamaica Eye, to make these public areas more accessible to the public by making them more safe and deterring crime. There is one positive indicator, however, that districts with high levels of informality do better at, and it's civic engagement. Civic engagement as measured through voter turnout and community organizations. Yes, voter turnout across elections tends to be higher in electoral districts that have high levels of informality. This represents the latest evidence of clientelism at play in our political system. Informal settlements function as vote banks for local political representatives. But the political participation in these marginalized areas does not translate to meaningful or sustained community improvements. Overall, from this study, you get a picture of siloed governance with no unified urban vision, clientelistic politics with short-term vote-seeking investments rather than programmatic investments. Informal areas are visible enough for votes, but invisible in service delivery. And weak democratic participation in urban governance. Public consultations are merely performative and don't necessarily translate to where investing the resources where it is needed most. These are not just policy issues. These are issues of dignity, safety, and justice. The OneCity Explorer platform we developed offers a public and interactive tool for locating service gaps, supporting evidence-based planning, and empowering communities with data. The report lays out the empirical foundation for a national conversation on urban exclusion, smarter use of scarce resources, and a realignment with the planning and lived experience of all Jamaica's urban residents. It's meant to facilitate a new model of planning, one that is data-driven, open source, and participatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. I now invite our moderator, Mr. Simon Johnson, to the platform and the panelists. Simon Johnson has been peripheral to CAPRI for a long time, has worked on previous reports for us, and is a well-known and well-respected contributor to public engagement and public issues, especially on finance and economics. Can I ask the panelists now to come to the platform? The question and answer will be intermediated through an online platform called Slido. You take your phones after you've put them on silent and go to slido.com. When you go to slido.com, you put in the event. It's going to ask you for an event code, and the event code is CAPRI. And thereafter, you can post your questions, or you can look at questions that have been posted by others and upvote those questions. And the questions that get the most upvotes will go to the top of the rank and are more likely to be articulated and asked. So do participate and enjoy the panel discussion.
Thanks, Dr. King. So I want to have a very engaging conversation today, both with the panel, but of course with the audience, both here and online viewing. So please utilize Slido, OneCity, as Dr. King would have mentioned. I'm Simon Johnson. I think my experience spans a few different things, economics, investments, overall financial literacy. But today I'm here as one of the advisors on the advisory board for the OneCity project. I've read the report, and what I would like to get from this panel discussion is a broad understanding of the report itself. However, I would also want to better understand, and for the audience to better understand, how we operationalize this. How do we move from what the team has done here, the research here, and how do we contextualize that within the professional setting, you know, of Professor Archer, but it's okay to call you Simone, right? Okay, Simone as well. But I also want Aleem to give us his context from the research perspective. So I have like 100 questions. I hope that's okay. So I'll start with a few questions. Aleem, the report links, and one sec, let me just introduce everyone that's here. Actually, I'll allow them to introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Simone on my far left.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening and for the invitation extended to be a part of this groundbreaking event, yes, to have the inaugural report being presented, being launched, and for us to be a part of sharing that. So my background is with respect to geospatial. I represent the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and in particular within the area of geospatial matters. So within the National Spatial Data Management Branch, which looks at the whole spearheading of geospatial matters, geospatial policy development, and ensuring that geospatial data is available, it's made accessible, and it is actively being utilized at various levels of our society to inform decision making, such as this project. So I am so happy, so pleased to be a part of this, given how much data would have been core with respect to all the work that would have been done where this project is concerned, and given the power in terms of visualization, and in particular in the presentation that we just saw, in terms of being able to see what are the products of the work that was done for Montego Bay versus for the Kingston area, and with that being able to understand, based on what would have been highlighted, what the outcomes are. And so with that, being able to be here and be a part of the panel in terms of sharing where that is concerned and the power of geospatial information. So I'm happy with respect to how the presentation ended, which would have spoken to the fact that data was core, open data, the use of an open platform to drive that, and the importance of community engagement, which then needs to happen after this, to get the community involved with respect to solutions and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ali?
Hi, I'm Ali Mahaber. I'm a research fellow at CAPRI, and I guess I was the one who put all this data together with the help of the team, of course. And I'm an urban geographer by training, and one of the things I've noticed a lot, doing my own research, is that persistent data gap that exists. That problem, when you're looking to get what some would be considered essential data, just how hard it is to get your hands on it. Going to different agencies, organizations, calling this person, sending an email to another one, not getting any follow-up. So I think the combination of this report and the OneCity Explorer itself, it seeks to address this gap. And we really hope it gets used and utilized. And, I guess, that's my intro.
Thank you. Archer?
Good evening, everyone. Carol Archer, an educator, first and foremost. I'm at the University of Technology, Jamaica. My background is in geography, urban planning, and political science. I teach at UTech, course in community development, urban governance, housing and public policy. And I've consulted on several projects, perhaps too many at this point, relating to this topic. My most recent activity was the preparation of the urban renewal policy for Jamaica. And yes, there is a paucity of data to guide policy. That's been my experience. In addition to that, I've worked closely with NEPA, the Town and Country Planning Authority, and most recently been engaged by the mayor as part of his advisory. So this activity that we're doing, well, the conversation that we're having is, for me, is ongoing. So I would want for us to conclude with some more specific outcomes and activities that can now take to the next level, particularly as it relates to the question of participation and engaging citizens and civil society, because that's one of the problems that I find most troubling in the whole process, the engagement and the involvement in a meaningful way of the citizens in the decision-making process to execute solutions.
Thank you, Professor Archer. Alim, I'll start with you. The report links insecure land tenure to a series of challenges that range from water access to crime. Why is it so important to have formal land settlements or formal land titling processes?
Thanks for that question, Simon. Well, based on the analysis we would have conducted, informality, particularly as it relates to irregular land tenure, it is correlated to so many indicators in often negative terms. We saw in a number of different dimensions, lower levels of education, financial inclusion, water access, a number of different services. And I think at the core of it, formal tenure regularization offers a pathway toward, security and stability that's needed in these areas. It also provides a platform, importantly, for credit, people to be able to get a loan, to be able to get access and to financial systems. Alexander would have mentioned and made note of the level of underbanking that exists in these areas. These are areas that are heavily underserved when it comes to the infrastructure that exists, not just in banking, but in multiple different areas. And regularization offers like a pathway, just to offer a starting point where these services can be rolled out and built out. And what I also think is important to mention is the stigma that exists and it's attached to a lot of these informal areas. Having worked there, you often find the case that when people are applying for jobs, they have to put another address, a sort of like zip coding, a discrimination, like zip coding, like in the US, where certain zip codes are maligned against. The same thing happens here in Jamaica to a great degree. So, if you could provide some way out of that informality to something that is more formal, it's not a complete panacea, but it could be a starting point to, building more secure and like more available opportunities in employment, education, all these different areas.
So the informality, so give me kind of a domino effect. I like to think in ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, right? Informality, you're saying, does that directly impact the unemployment? Or is it that informality influences something? So the informality is there, it's created, and it breeds something that feeds into unemployment and pulling these communities away from formal settlement.
Yeah, I think of it as a sort of wicked problem. It's a concept that come across a lot in social science and geographic research, where something persists and it just is this informality. It leads to a process where it just sort of reinforces and exacerbates itself. With informality, in these areas they experience like a lack of services, issues related to poor and unpaved roads that gives way to maybe them being more vulnerable to crime and gangs, taking over these areas, and that leads to more problems coming in terms of because of that higher levels of poverty and then lower levels of education, and it keeps churning and churning around. So by regularization, it offers like a pathway, out of that, maybe stop the churn and like get out of this sort of domino effect that we're talking about.
So, Professor Archer, how do you regularize? And I'm saying this, given your background, contextualize this in, we have local government, we have central government, we have public agencies that are responsible for different parts of that. How do you regularize or do urban planning within that context?
Before I answer that question, I want us to put in context. And a very good picture is painted for us by Colin Clark in his work on Kingston urban development from 1692 to 2005. And he gives the history of Kingston. And I think it's important for us to reference that because it gives us a sense of the nature of the informality. And when we understand the nature of the informality, then we can begin to look at how we address the situation. So if we were to take, for example, a look at Almontown, and instantly we think Almontown is an informal community. No, it's not. Almontown, if you follow Colin Clark, it formally developed. When you look at the grid system that was part of the historical development of Kingston, I want to use this opportunity to recognize my colleague, Pat Green here, I have to call you out in church, Pat, who would understand. So what has happened in places like Almontown and the older part of cities that persons would have moved out. We would not have transitioned in the formal way. So you have persons who are living family in places, units, dwelling units owned by family, but they have not formally or legally transitioned, in terms of the ownership. You have persons who are squatting without legal papers. You have persons who have a rental arrangement. So we can, and I recently worked on the social impact assessment to inform the government campus project in Almontown. And one of the things we had to recommend is that one has to be careful in terms of how we implement the regularization because the nature of the tenure varies from along one street. And it is some areas, they do have access. What has happened is that in the older part of our cities, not just Kingston, but most of our towns and centers, we have poor infrastructure, lack of maintenance of the infrastructure, and this also now contributes to how persons access the city in general. Yes? And it contributes to the whole question of crime and poor social services and on and on and on. So we have to first understand the nature of that tenure relationship in the area before we can say this is what we need. Because the other thing that we found from looking at preparing the urban renewal policy is that we cannot use a one-size-fits-all. In some areas, when you're proposing redevelopment, one has to consider, do you do what they refer to as a complete development, slash and burn and build new, or do we do what the literature referred to as regeneration, rehabilitation, or redevelopment. Yes? So to go back to your question then, it is, we cannot prescribe, this is informality, this is how it has to be addressed. It is a little bit more nuanced than that.
Is that it's more than just to say, let's formalize.
Yes.
Because there are instances, and I believe Tivoli Gardens, if I remember correctly,
yes,
was built up from ground up.
From Bakawal to
from Bakawal. So there is the possibility, if not maintained properly, if not having proper rules around tenureship and how you pass on that tenureship
Yes.
structures, policing, etc., that you can have formal settlements that move back into informal settlements.
Yes, which then suggests that we need to change how we go about planning, because what we are seeing now in some of these communities where persons have the title, but guess what? The planning, the town and country planning laws says that, well, there's not much that we can do because the road network prevents us from even acknowledging the current planning laws. So they need to be changed, because we did work in Nagozed, and that's one of the things we found. The roads are so narrow, which according to the town planning laws, the municipality cannot take those communities because they don't fit the dimension as prescribed by law. So the communities would technically still be informal. So what then suggests is that the laws, the legislations would need to be changed.
Got you. And now, just to go back to the question as well, how do we contextualize that? So the laws, the legislations need to change, but we have different, I would say, institutions responsible for different parts of that. How do we coordinate, and I'm coming to you, Mr. Lloyd, how do we coordinate between the local government, central government, and other agencies that own or are a part of that stakeholder network?
Right. So what we also have to recognize, because I hear and I visit the councils, the municipal corporations regularly and sit and listen. And what has happened, sadly, over the past, maybe say 15, 20 years, that central government has become so strong-armed in matters related to local government that they have developed this habit of, oh, we'll look to central government, or oh, we would look to NEPA. But one of the things that if you were to review the 2016 Local Governance Act, it gives the local authority the powers to make their own laws. So the issue that I've just mentioned about the road network or the services being provided for community to be formal, the local authorities can introduce their own laws to change that for the communities that they are serving. But they tend to focus more on the work of central government rather than say, okay, we are now going to address the issue in this municipality, in this local, by doing these things.
So thanks to that, Professor Archer. Invariably comes back over to you, because that I guess probably confusion, whether designed or not, between the responsibilities there of central and local government are important and form an important part of this. How do you respond to that?
So I smiled while listening to Professor Archer speak about municipal corporations. And when I think in listening, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, which is the largest ministry, has 9 portfolio areas. Under the ministry falls NEPA. Yes, dealing with the Town and Country Planning Act. Under the ministry also falls NEGALPA, dealing with planning and development for the Negril area. But also under the ministry is the Urban Planning and Development branch that looks at urban renewal. All right? So based on how the ministry is structured, it is structured to ensure that the whole planning and renewal and development process is more of an inclusive, collaborative effort and not disjointed. So a lot of effort is made with respect to working along with the Ministry of Local Government and is it community development? Yes, and community development with respect to streamlining planning and development initiatives. In working with municipal corporations, because from our end, in the National Spatial Data Management Branch and also the Land Information Council of Jamaica, one of our moves is trying to ensure that we aid municipal corporations to develop their capacity with respect to geospatial skills and knowledge base, so that they can then be able to generate the data to help support the planning process in their communities, in the areas within which they have jurisdiction. In working with them, you'll hear them speak about the fact that they have challenges. One of the primary challenges is resources. And so with that, they then defer to central government, which tends to have a larger budget to execute particular projects and programs.
So it comes back to the resources.
Yes,
And
that's a major restriction. So they speak about that major limitation.
And you mentioned urban renewal. What does urban, and I know Professor Archer, you mentioned a few things, a few technical terms around how you can go about building cities or rebuilding cities, but from your perspective, Mr. Lloyd, what does urban renewal look like for Jamaica in 5-10 years, and how can a study like this help to feed into that? The data for this help to feed into the plans that are either there or are being developed?
So I prefer to defer to Professor Archer, since she would have worked on the policy that will be driving that. But what I will say is that core to that is the need for current, accurate, reliable geospatial data. Archival data being very important, and as Professor Archer would have spoken to the history, understanding the history and the context within which different communities would have developed.
Which
and transitioned over time. Exactly, and what is reflected in the report. So given that context, but also looking at trends over time, how have these communities evolved? What are the paradigms, what are the projections for the future? And being able to analyze, being able to capture, collect, maintain all of that volume of data, and with it being able to analyze and being able to conduct analysis and actually being able to see and understand the trends and make projections. And based on that, planning effectively for the future. So
Professor Archer, this is perfect, because this study, a lot of the data would feed in. So this is the study you've been waiting for, then to actually feed into that.
Right.
What I want to understand, and it's on the back of exactly what Ms. Lloyd would have stated, is when we're doing urban renewal, and again, I think ABCs 1, 2, 3s. How does renewal work? Is renewal, okay, permits going forward for building XYZ will now have to comply with this, or let's demolish that building, etc., and then try to rebuild the communities? Or, Kingston is far gone, let's build something in St. Thomas that's much better and much better planned.
Okay. Well, the thing about when you need to have a vision for the town, the city, the space where you live. How do you see this area developing in 5, 10, 15 years? Yeah? Once you have that vision, and the vision is usually a collective process. So it's not where, the technocrats, the planners, and of course the elected officials go in a, dark room with smoke and come up and then say, here it is. It's supposed to be a much more involved process than that. And we would have had examples from across the world, whether it's Medellin or sections of Rio or even Johannesburg, where there's constant engagement and feedback from the citizen. This is what we want to see the city, right? And then you would provide then having that iterative process where the trained technocrats would present ideas, yes, as to how the area would be shaped, right? And of course, we would, in addition to the ideas of how the area should be shaped, the government decision maker would have the guidelines, the policies, yes? Because the policies would then set out one, timeline, 2, resource that would be made available for that particular timeline, and some general principles as to how that would govern the city. So here you talk about the just cities. In fact, that was the principle that we used to guide the urban renewal policy for Jamaica, right? The just city, which is in keeping with,
international standards.
Right, and SDG 11, inclusive, resilient cities. So you have the vision, you You have the policy framework, you have the participatory approach with the technocrats, the learned, trained individuals involved working collaboratively with the people to, build out the city. Now, I have been part of elsewhere where this has worked, right? So when we go to sections in Brooklyn, New York, and you go, oh my God, look at that. This was something that was conceptualized 20, 30 years ago, and it's slowly built out, right? There are usually people who drive this, right? At the level of the citizenry, at the level of the local government, but also at the national government. So there are key drivers, there are key agencies that, once you have agreed on the vision, will help to build out on this.
So before we go to the Vox Pop video, I really want to go to Miss Lloyd with this, because a concern that, people have now, even within this space, is the price of properties in Kingston, right? Or the price of properties within these metropolitan areas overall. How do we do that renewal, implement all of these policies without disenfranchising these same people? So if we, this works well, the communities get more equity, they get more services, more schools, etc. Property prices go up. How do we try avoid a migration of people that cannot afford to live in these same communities that they used to can afford? Because remember, part of it is the cost of living there as well. Them migrating to other new fragmented communities. And Aleem, I wanted to touch on that, and then we can go on with it. But Miss Lloyd.
That's such a difficult question, because
that's why I asked it to you,
It is so multifaceted. A lot of that is hinged, of course, on socioeconomic background and what it is that persons have in terms of access to income. What are the opportunities that they have access to, and what do they make use of? But also, there's a lot of politics that's involved in this, different from the market that exists, right? There's a lot of demand. However, persons being able to afford what is being provided, the disparity is so different, is so significant. Middle income earners, let's not even go informal, middle income earners to a significant extent cannot afford what is being provided. On average now, we're talking about $40 to $50 million for a 1 to 2 bedroom house within the Kingston area. How many persons earn, let's say, $4 million for the year, $5 million? And even with that, being able to afford a mortgage of at least $200,000 to be able to comfortably pay mortgage, pay vehicle expenses, maintain a family, and all that comes with that in terms of expenses. Many can't. Many can't. And so with that, it's a difficult question to answer in terms of how does one really address that? Because there is a market. You have the developers, of course, based on what happens in their paradigm and also based on what happens behind the scenes, drives what is there in terms of the price provision, in terms of what's the market for these various housing developments.
And the financial institutions as well.
There we go.
In terms of funding.
There we go. So it is difficult. So through various government projects and programs, yes, more accessible with respect to housing developments that meet needs of the lower income bracket is being provided. And so with that, that is good in terms of persons being able to afford. So with the new social housing program, which is pushed through the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, there are a number of persons who are able to afford houses. Never before has so many titles been given, houses being handed over, and also titles being given over to persons who could not afford, based on whatever ways and means, in terms of whether it's a case whereby they would have suffered some form of disaster event, or they would have, based on their socioeconomic background, were just living in very impoverished situations. And so the thrust with respect to being able to provide housing, but that is still for a limited number of persons, and
Okay.
there's still a significant majority who still need, apart from lower, middle income persons who really want to be able to afford. And so it's a very difficult answer.
So
I'm not
I
sure if
understand.
Aleem
So Aleem,
can
it
speak
comes
to
down
it
to you.
based on all the work.
The report speaks to financial inclusion. So I guess how you can put it in your context as well is, do the financial realities of the communities that you would have assessed in this mapping, the people in the communities, does it match the person that would be able to afford the type of houses if these communities were to be formalized?
Well, you're putting a lot of pressure on me. But what I can say is, and again, that regularization, that formalization, it can only be a starting point. And in regard to Professor Archer, in the context of specific communities and specific modes of informality, right? What I think it can offer is, more housing options. It could help to create a greater degree of housing stock, or with more housing, perhaps there's a possibility in the market for, prices to come down. And ultimately, I think it gives, people the autonomy to be able to choose. If in these areas, apart from just regularization, we also invest in upgrading. And the report makes a recommendation to be able to provide and ensure there's access to basic amenities like water, electricity. I think it would be the case that, these areas can become quite in demand. And with that, there's also the possibility of, people selling their homes. Maybe they might go to other areas. And, there's this whole trend of like, for example, in America, when a family normally is able to, move up in income, they move, to another area in the suburbs, another family moves in, and there's just like continuous migration cycle that takes place. So maybe it's something that can also be replicated in Kingston as well, creating more housing stock, giving people the option to move, and hopefully that, helps to,
Understood.
the market.
So the panel spoke about feedback from citizens. So we'll now hear directly from members of the public in a short vox pop, sharing their views on the topic at hand. You can play the video now. You're in audio, no video.
Don't feel like we have a real voice because we talk about something and it now got happen until when it's the election time.
I grew up in a place called De La Vega, Spanish Town Rocky.
I live in Cassava Peace African Village, and no, our community is not prepared because the politicians who were elected have not done what they are supposed to do. Garbage is not picked up regularly. The gully, everything is in the gully because the people them don't have anywhere else to do, Every now and again, garbage get picked up, but it is not consistent.
My community is prepared for flooding and environmental pollution due to proper garbage disposals and drainage.
It's on the road. A lot. When I mean a lot of water is on the road. But away from that, we don't really have any flooding and all of that stuff.
And we do get flooding on some of the streets. And other than that, we don't get our collection of garbage. It's not on a regular basis, so you have them piling up. We would love to have a regular garbage collection. We'd like to have the road paved.
Yes, I do think the persons within my community do have a true voice due to our football field. At one point, our football field wasn't in the condition to be played on, but our community members reached out to the appropriate government bodies and we got the park fixed.
And a voice, mommy, we now no voice. One time them come in a voting time and I wouldn't see them again.
Politicians are they don't even listen during time for campaigning for elections. So they just show up and will give some tokens, around election time, and licky people just go vote and do not hold them accountable, and they need to be held accountable.
And they say the clinic locked them down at Tavan, so they need more clinic down there, so because most people are sick and we live far, so we can't go to hospital. We live so far. That one day I'm get an asthma attack, I'm nearly dead.
We can improve on the health center and also the fixing of the road.
No, I don't think I would have to go outside of my community to get those basic supports in terms of health support and job support due to the many jobs available within my community and the doctor's office that is so close within my community.
Our community is rural and a lot of people are not, employed fully. So for those who can't afford to go out to the private doctors, they have to depend on the Linstead Hospital. Security is a problem, in the communities around Linstead. It never used to be like that, but we have crime and violence.
Well, the first thing I would like for my community to have is a community youth center, positive learning activities, positive learning activities for youth. They have nothing, there's nothing available, and the politicians should be preparing the youths so that they can be responsible citizens. Of course, part of that is civic education, and that happens in the school and at home, but politicians still have a responsibility to provide institutions, policies and programs that will ensure that youths are being prepared to be responsible citizens.
Very, very well said. All right, so a reminder to everyone, I'm seeing questions on Slido, so we're getting to that, so remember to post your questions there. I think just from those comments alone, we can see the differences between communities that have, I want to know where he lives because he seems to have a lot of stuff, and communities that just don't have that. And Aleem, based on what you're saying, this report creates a framework that helps to link those two, to not take amenities from one and bring it to the other, not diffuse amenities, but to add amenities, health, schools, etc., in communities that don't have that. But Professor Archer, your reactions to the video?
Well, I would have been working in a number of communities that I think I heard someone from Augustone, from Tavern, and I've worked in those areas, and I'm very familiar. The thing, though, is I would suggest that we take a new approach to this whole question of planning and providing access to service in communities by first looking at what are the assets, what are the things that are strong in communities. And because it's part of the empowerment process, it is part of that participatory process that you are recommending coming out of your study. If we approach it from the point of view of as opposed to what currently exists in this community that we can build on. Yes? What are the services that needs to be enhanced, and how do we enhance these services? Okay? I think that's one approach that we should take, because when we go to the point of needs as opposed to the point of assets and building on assets, there is that sort of, I forgot the financial term, deficits, right? Which does not move the needle in planning in a more proactive way. So focusing on what currently exists, what are the assets, how do we build on these assets, whether it is Tivoli, Raytown, or Cherry Gardens, right? That is important. Focusing on, and I think you mentioned in the study as well, the social capital, yes? Because in your view, these communities, they have social capital, but I think even though especially the vulnerable communities where they have social capital, meaning that, the interaction and the strength of working together and the civic engagement, the type of political capital that they have is through their every 5 years voting, rather than the political capital that influence where, if I mean, I consider myself somebody. I live in Barbican. I know my counselor, and I can pick up the phone and say to my counselor, you know, there's a pothole. I'll have to say it about 10 times. But eventually, it will get addressed, even if it's just to pack it with Marl, and he makes sure that he comes and says, hey, Prof, me fix your road, eh? Right. So that's part of what is missing, that encouraging residents to build on their political capital, not just the one that provides the votes, but the influence where they can, if they're not getting the services, they can go on social media, Twitter, and wherever, and make the demands. I don't think the communities, particularly the vulnerable communities, they are not there yet. Right? And I think that's where we need to go. In addition to the legislations, because that's also a major issue, because we cannot address and implement the recommendations with the current sets of legislations. We are very outdated. Yes? They don't allow for change to happen in a quick turnaround time. It takes what? 5 years it took for us to complete the development order that guides the land use planning in 5 years. And that's just the piece of legislation. That's not the plan that says this is how the city will be laid out and changed, for the next 5 years.
Understood. Thanks, Alim. I want to come to you as well. But while you respond to that and what Professor Archer said, if you can also touch on what some of the recommendations coming out of this report, particularly the Urban Equity Commission, and how that feeds into exactly what Professor Archer just mentioned.
Sure. Well, I actually want to push back against you a little bit, Prof, because I want to know where people are saying where, because I think it's important that we take into account the deficiencies that do exist. And I think that the Urban Integration Index, it shows us, it does show us, where those assets are, where the needs are. But it also, in doing that, we see where the deficiencies lie. And I think we need to know where those deficiencies lie because we need to urgently address it. We need to know where resources need to be allocated, where interventions are needed most. And I think the Urban Integration Index allows us to look into these deficiencies, put the resources where it's needed, and sort of tackle it. So maybe it's a different sort of philosophical approach, but I think we achieving the same.
I think what can also help you there, Alim. So is it possible to put up the map, the live dashboard that we have, so that while we're speaking, you can kind of see some of those disparities that we're talking about. But yeah. And the Urban Equity Commission, how does it feed into kind of bringing in this civic engagement as well? And would community members be a part of this commission?
Well, one of the biggest problems that I think we have is the influence of politics and the politicization of many of these issues. And I think informality endures because of a state of political forbearance. Essentially, it endures because they simply don't want it to be addressed. People in these communities, they essentially act as vote banks, and politicians are able to leverage that each cycle and, from them gain those votes and give them sort of piecemeal items, whether that's like benefits, especially during these election cycles, whether fixing the roads or going in the communities, making like pot of soup and things like that, So what the commission essentially aims to do is to, get beyond these political influences to enable more, independent planning and thinking by individuals who, don't have that sort of, who are not involved in that way. When I envisioned it, I thought it would be, the positions would be taken up by people from civil society, people who, typically advocate for these communities and the people who live there, academics like Professor Archer and others, and also people in government, coming together as well. And I'm glad you touched on that point. People themselves should be involved, the people from these communities themselves, because they live there, and they should have a voice in how those communities turn out. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Alim. And before I'm coming back to you, Ms. Lloyd, what I want to ask a few questions from Slido. The first question is actually to you. How will the study's findings be communicated to residents of these most marginalized communities who are often least connected to formal data channels?
That is a really good question. And I think you put me on the spot.
Yeah, I have a tendency to do that,
But I think I'm glad that question has been raised, because I think it points out maybe a disconnect between what we're doing, and it raises something critical that maybe we haven't considered. We've considered, definitely we need to continue working with the agencies who we've initially gotten that data from and keep up those partnerships and relationships, because we want this Explorer to be a living and breathing mechanism that keeps on going, that the data, it's kept up to date and accurate. But I think you're right. In order to, whoever asked that question is right in saying that we do also need to maybe reach out to these communities to let them know, hey, this thing exists. It's out there, and you can use it as a tool as well. Maybe you could take it to your MP, other policymakers, decision makers, say, hey, this is the problem that exists in my community. We know it exists. Now we have the data to back that up,
So I have one question for you, Professor Archer, and one for you, Mr. Lloyd. Given the dense population of informal settlements with several families living in each tenement yard, how realistic is it to issue land titles?
Well, we have seen that there are different types of tenure relationship that can be established. And one of the things that the very recent study coming out of Puerto Rico, where they have instituted this new approach in land titling, which is called the community land trust. That has been established elsewhere, particularly the US. And rather than give individual title, individual ownership, the land is owned within the community, and there is a structure that manages the land on behalf of the people in the community. So this is a new approach, relatively new for the Caribbean, and it's something that we are looking at to see whether it would be possible for Jamaica. Because when we did two exercises, one in that UTEC was involved with, one in Rosetown in terms of giving land, providing access to individual titles, and in Nagozed. The uptake for the average resident was very slow because of the cost associated with getting titles. Yes? On average, I believe it can cost maybe $300 to $1,000 US. Yes? And so where you can, yes, the land administration department can help in that. There are certain areas that it just, because it's not a project in that community, residents can't access. So we need to look at our land tenure arrangements in law and look at how other means by which persons can own communally as opposed to individually. But of course, to get there, we need to do the study. We need to be informed by empirical data as to a particular approach. So there is this notion of a community land trust that is being investigated as a possibility. So that's one approach that we can use. The other one, real quick, is oftentimes the focus has been on individual home ownership as opposed to building more units for rental. Yes, we need to have access to housing, and the solution is not through direct home ownership. Yes, but through access to housing, the varying ways of, whether it is through cooperative, rental or other means that exist that we have not really fully explored for implementation in Jamaica.
Thank you. Interesting models. The first one sounds like a cooperative for land. I guess what immediately comes up is, how does a resident take equity from that? Because we want to link this back to the formal financial system, specifically for them or for the business, etc. But Mr. Lloyd, we have a question for you, but I know you wanted to comment on the Vox Pop, and then we'll take one question from the audience. How do we, let me find it. What steps, it says will, but can be taken to ensure that recommendations from this study lead to actual policy changes rather than remaining just on paper, well, and on screen? Tough one.
So I'm going to take stages because there's a number of things I wanted to comment on.
Yeah.
So I smiled while listening to the various community persons speak, because really, through the voice swap, they confirm the fact that we need to be engaging them more, because they are the ones who understand what is happening in their community. They are the ones who can say to us what exists. So when Prof spoke to the need for the mapping of assets, so community asset mapping, that is something which is core. The importance of creating a baseline for communities. So what exists on ground. The Social Development Commission would have been very key with respect to leading that drive in terms of doing community-based mapping, asset mapping, and getting the support of community members with respect to assisting with that process. The whole people participatory process, engaging persons so that they are more, they feel more invested. And then with that owning and being more responsive with respect to ensuring that whatever is being proposed, that is actually implemented, and with that they support the implementation, is very key. So when the question with respect to hazards, what type of hazards are impacting your community? How ready are you with respect to being able to respond to a flood event or other hazards? With each event, and Hurricane Beryl, classic case in point, happened last year, and we are still trying to recover from the impacts of that hurricane. Given the level of devastation that would have happened within both areas that were captured in terms of the cities, but also in terms of other parishes that would have been impacted by it. And so with that, let me take a step back. So one of the activities that I do is I coordinate a team of persons. And we are a team of GIS volunteers, Geographic Information Systems volunteers, who are trained persons who, in the form of a team, National Emergency Response GIS team, support the ODPM in the event of a disaster. So whenever Jamaica is impacted by a major event, and depending on the level of devastation, ODPM needs the support of a team to go out in the field within 48 hours of the event and actually go through the process of mapping what has happened in terms of the impact. So after Beryl would have gone out with respect to doing mapping in various areas. The team is comprised of persons from various government entities. So National Water Commission, National Works Agency, the Water Resources Authority, National Land Agency, and the listing goes on. So what was key for us is being able to go into communities and interact with them one-on-one, see what was happening on ground. So, we would have gotten feedback from the parish disaster coordinators indicating that their parish would have been impacted. These are the communities most affected. Please come and do whatever level of assessment so that we can understand what is happening, and then for whatever restoration or support to be provided. So the importance of conducting an initial damage assessment after an event within 48 hours is key. And so that isn't possible without the support, or that isn't effective without the support of community members who can walk with us, carry us to the areas where there were houses literally holding on the banks of a river, on the side of a hill, and totally washed away or carried away because of landslides. We wouldn't have known that. We wouldn't have known where to go based on where they were and based how inaccessible the areas were without community support. So that level of importance. They were also able to speak to us and to share with us what's the history in terms of their area. We don't know that. So they can say, okay, it's best to take this route versus that route. So yes, we are using geospatial information, but we are using it on tablets, we're using it on phones, we're using it on desktops, and using the technology to help us to see what is there. However, there's a difference in using technology and actually being on ground. All right, so the importance of ground truthing. So that also came out in the project. So it's use of both. So the importance of technology and the data that is fed or that is provided through technology, but also being there in the communities, interacting with persons, being on ground, seeing what is there, and the creation of a baseline being very key. So what was there before? What was there in terms of assets? What has been displaced? What has been destroyed? What needs to be replenished? What needs to be improved? So when the Augustine, I don't know if it's Augustine or Hermitage lady, spoke about areas that need to be improved in her community, she can speak to that because she lives it. Persons within and around her live it. The little children who spoke about needing access to healthcare and him having an asthma attack and almost dying. He is living it. We are not. All right. So that community engagement being very key.
So how do we move from community engagement through some of these recommendations that have been made by Alim and his team to policy, to implementation? So we've heard the feedback that she's given, and I like to break it into smaller steps. What do you do tomorrow?
Yeah, can I take that? I'm glad we're touching on this on the ground need to go into these communities and get that data. What I can say is that we've already been doing it. But study 2 of this project, it essentially is looking at the urban governance landscape as it currently exists, the gaps that are there, what needs to be addressed. And this study essentially is the baseline, it acts as a baseline, knowing, where the needs are, the deficiencies and so on. But we also have to feed back, people's voices into that system so that, they can also let us know, what needs to get done as well, and to take that into account. So we've essentially are doing an ecosystem mapping of the current governance system, how the different governance levels going from local government, the municipalities, all the way to the national government, how they link to each other, how do they work, how do citizens get help with that, how do they access those essential services. And we're working essentially on a digital platform where people can essentially, if they have an issue, what we're thinking of, if they have an issue in their community, is something they can report and get it to the right agency, to the right service, so that their voices can be heard. So this is something we're actively thinking about, and something that's going to be coming up pretty soon.
So I'll give you 30 seconds to respond, Professor Archer, and then we take a question from there.
A response, but sort of a continuation, because one of the things that I have found based on the work that I've been doing is that data collection is costly, right, Luke? It's a very costly exercise. And perhaps that's why we don't do it. We are not consistent in the community profile that SDC is supposed to be doing. 2009 was the last time there's no consistency in how we collect data. So I'm very concerned that yes, you would probably do this, which then provide a baseline. But then when we come another 5 years or 2 years, you're going to be comparing apples and cheese and rocks because there's no consistency in how we collect the data. So perhaps we need to look at whether it is legislation, because I know there are some policies in place, for when we started the National Spatial Data Branch, but there are no resources provided for the consistently collecting data to inform. Yes? So those are some, the consistency, resource to collect, and the uniformity in which we collect data. And that is one of the fundamental problems associated with land use planning and decision making in Jamaica.
And I'd add to the...
If I could continue on what Professor Archer just said. So we have come a far way. We have. And where we're at now is the fact that the government has seen the importance, recognizes the importance of investing in data. And with that, investing in technology to support entities being able to collect the data and being able to maintain data. So we're in a much better stead now in terms of resources that are available, that are accessible by government entities to do that, because what is also key in driving projects like this project and other projects is really ensuring that data that is credible data is what is available. So we've come a far way. So we're in a good stead in terms of being able to achieve that. And I'm happy you spoke about standards. Standards is key. How it is that we go about doing this data collection and ensuring that there is consistency in how it is done, the frequency within which it is done, and you are quite correct. Depending on what is used in terms of methodology to collect the data and maintain it, it can get very costly.
So this slide, I think you saw that one comment here, I even wrote a name beside of it, because it's so you mentioned data consistency. I was actually going to say, I think there's, and this data thing is general, I'm sure CAPRI will agree given the research that they've done. It's probably the appreciation of data itself that will feed in, and that it's actually needed, that will feed into, it being consistently collected and resources going there. But we'll take a question from the audience. Does anyone in the, see a hand here, can I get him a mic? Right here.
Hello, good evening. My name is Sebastián Arguelles. I'm a PhD student in the University of Amsterdam. Thanks for the talk. I have to make a comment because I'm pretty much concerned about thinking or this perception that I see in between lines of data or technology always does this solution to urban changes, and I think this leads me to a reflection. No, we need to be more critical about how we're using technology and how technology is political and how can be used and can lead to displacement of people, also promoting segregation. So I wonder if in the lives of this comment, have you thought about how this tool, it can also be a political tool, can also lead to displacement, can also increase the spatial inequalities, no? That's my comment, and thank you for it.
Thank you. Are you?
Sure. I think it's something, it's a criticism we've got, like a lot, is that the data that we would have gathered as part of the Explorer, it may be used to look at certain communities, and by looking at the efficiencies, they are sort of demonized in certain ways. That's something I've thought of, but I think it's important to note that it's not about like looking at problem communities. It's essentially looking at where the problems are, so that we might be able to just better address it and allocate interventions where they're needed. I think we always need to be conscious of means of reducing harm and how we use data towards whatever means we're deploying it for. And it's something there's guidelines to put in place towards that. But I still think it's important that we put that data out there and in an open access way, so that it can be used. And all actors, including people from the communities themselves, if they can make use of it and push back and so on. And I think what's also important in this whole data question and data collection question is also the need for greater coordination and collaboration among all the different agencies. Because we have all this good data that's being collected, and oftentimes it sits on a shelf somewhere, or only one agency has it, and you try to request it and you don't get it, and it's out there. And there's so many projects that are repeated over and over and essentially produce, the same data. Whereas if different agencies could collaborate and share, we would save money on resources, so we could allocate it more effectively, and we would just have more data out there and have the good evidence that we need to, move forward and progress.
Thank you, Alim, and we are up on time, but I'll allow each person to just give their very brief 30-second final remarks, starting with you, Professor Archer.
Well, my remarks is around this future of cities and towns in Jamaica. We haven't really touched on it, but I would like to see that the recommendations presented in the report really help to shape and to guide the city. And I'm not talking about Kingston being like Dubai or Kingston being like Medellin. I want Kingston. I want for our decision makers to work with us, the citizens, based on the data that is out there, including this, to help to shape Kingston to be the future that we want Kingston, what we want Maypen, that we want Montego Bay to be. I really want for us to do that.
Thank you, Professor Alim.
I guess I sort of echo that sentiment. I really don't hope we end up with a Kingston that looks like the Google Gemini image that Alexander mentioned, with big skyscrapers and informal communities on the ground like everywhere. I think what it comes down to is, to keep doing the work that we do, ensure that, this Explorer is just the starting point. This report is just a starting point, and look at ways to ensure that this sort of open data and its use is something that is continuously done, continuously maintained, and be able to coordinate this data more and towards action, making action in these communities.
Thank you, Alim. Mr. Lloyd?
So I echo all comments thus shared, and just want to add significant congratulations, commendations to the entire team, because in going through and looking at each and every map that is presented in the report, that helps with understanding the visual context in terms of the outcomes of all the analysis that would have been done, so that we can really understand and appreciate the disparity that does exist in both areas. Speaks to the volume of work that would have been done, right? As I look through each map, I smiled with respect to the fact that I'm sure a lot of painstaking heartache would have happened in terms of, apart from trying to collate the data from agencies, and as Prof would have spoken to the fact that data is expensive, the whole act of creating is expensive. And so with that, sometimes the difficulty of agencies sharing the data and depending on the purpose of the data. But I find that entities, in particular government entities, tend to be more receptive when it's for research purposes or it's for national development projects, which is good, right? Which is good. It's just that we need to expand on that with respect to the whole data sharing arrangement and agreements, so that the flow happens with more fluidity, with more ease. And with that also, we need to ensure that we protect what is created. So the importance of, I can't stress enough the importance of metadata, being able to speak to every data that was used for this project in terms of who created it, when it was created, for what purpose, what level of accuracy, so that whoever picks up the report and reads it can really appreciate what is the context and background within which the report would have been presented, given the data that would have been used. So in the opening, we would have heard that the data, the presentation would have spoken to the fact that the data would have been up to 2023, all right? So it is still very much current, all right? And a lot of effort would have been made to get it to that stage. So with that, how it is that we can really, based on all that hard work, utilize it to do engagement, to share with communities, how it is that we can partner. Partnership and collaboration is key. Understanding who works within communities, who it is that we can collaborate with, who can help to get us there in terms of communities being more receptive to the outcomes and being able to really come on board in terms of supporting the policy development process, supporting the implementation process, and being more receptive with respect to whatever is being proposed. Yes? So collaboration, partnerships, synergies, key throughout the entire process. All right? And so with that, my encouragement, where the report is concerned, is to ensure that we're able to capture that and maintain that. So the metadata for all these maps and for all the hard work that would have gone into it, the sources in terms of all who would have provided support in terms of the data sets, so that whoever picks up and whoever would like to possibly build on this work in the future knows the basis from which to then build on and expand for the benefit of the communities reflected.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Ladd. I'm sure the team appreciates that encouragement. So what I've heard is we know where we don't want to be, that city with the slums around. We have a much better understanding of where we are, which is what would have been needed, a baseline, understanding a mapping of the communities, a mapping of needs, and a mapping of assets, which is still happening. Now, that creates the framework for where we can be, where the potential is, which is not a new, Bogota, not a new city at Dubai, etc., but a Kingston of the future that we can build now for ourselves, and help to formalize these communities without disenfranchising the members of those state communities. So thank you all for participating in this conversation. Thanks so much to the panelists. And yes, that's it.
Thank you, Simon. So perhaps we should end where we began. I understand from, the Hollywood press that they are working on an I Am Legend 2 with Will Smith, which I don't know what the plot is, and I don't really care. But I expect that it will be a continuation of that dystopian representation that we spoke about at the introduction. And what we're talking about here is, we are Kingston 2. And we want Kingston 2 to be as different from where Kingston 1. The data that is being gathered, the work that is being done, the recommendations that we have put forward, and certainly the sentiments and actions represented by what the panelists have spoken about, really speaks to that vision of we are Kingston 2, not looking like that Google image. So that's where we want to go with we are Kingston 2. We thank the presenter, the moderator, the panelists for what they have presented and engaged in today. We thank the BOTNAR Foundation for supporting this work. I'm not going to thank you for showing up, but it is to be appreciated. What we appreciate from CAPRI and the other consortium partners is not that you showed up, but is that you represent the constituency amongst us that is deeply interested in these matters, that you come here and that you engage and you participate. And it is that engagement which is going to move policy forward. So it's just to appreciate your interest and participation. The report is going to be published on our website in about a week's time from now. And the second study in this program will be launched in July. And that's not with fingers crossed. It will be launched in July, 2 months from now. As you exit the room, I encourage all of you to engage with the dashboard that we have produced on the monitors in the kiosk outside, and you get a real sense of what we have done and what we have accomplished and what we have produced. So enjoy some refreshments, engage with the dashboard, and we'll talk amongst ourselves.